And a glorious good afternoon to each and every one of you. This is A21 from Black Roses Garden Community Radio, continuing with some Black history lessons. Now, I know yesterday we left off, we were talking about the slaves who had come over with Phyllis Wheatley, Venture, Lucy, Olada, and all of those. They were very young, and they were ripped from their families at a very early age and kind of forced to go it alone. Some of these folks were Thomas Jefferson's slaves, and he would one day write. And a lot of white folks concurred that Black people's or Africans' grief was transient. We didn't feel pain and that kind of thing. And the big reason why the slave trade or Africans brought over to America was more lucrative was that when they tried to do it to the Indians knew America better than they did, and they could escape faster, and the Africans couldn't. So let's pick up with the tale of these children. Okay. Oh, crap. Give me a minute. I got the right page. Okay, where children and parents were suffering bondage together, mothers and fathers did what they could to protect their sons and daughters from too great a savaging. More than a few so loved their children that they sneaked visits to a child sold away, but not very far. More than a few so loved their children to the perilous point that they took them along when they attempted to escape. Take Lucy of South Carolina. In the spring of 1749, this woman fled captivity with one child in the womb and another on the hip. In many cases, an escape attempt was triggered by news or suspicion of impending separation of families through hiring out for sale. "Who buys me must buy my son too," a bold Cooper shouted as he and his 15-year-old son were up for a resale at a North Carolina auction in 1739. Whether this father and son were purchased by the same person is unknown, but many children had two or more owners by the time they were 16. And some young people had the gumption to spirit away to their parents. Such a plucky child was Esther, the property of the Charleston merchant Robert Pringle. In 1740, Pringle sold Esther because he was fed up with her practice of going frequently to her father and mother. They were in captivity on a plantation about 20 miles from Charleston. Some men boys, and men boys were referred to males aged 14 to 18, and women girls aged 13 to 16, as the colonists called them, ran away not to a parent but to freedom, perhaps to one of the maroon settlements such as Fort Mose, established in 1738 in St. Augustine, Florida. Occasionally, children were freed upon the death of their owners, and sometimes these owners were the children's biological fathers. In his last will and testament, dated February 19, 1761, Thomas Haddon of Scarsdale, New York, stated that, "At my death, all my Negroes are to be freed," and he requested that all the children be apprenticed to a trade and taught to read. Furthermore, as concerned the Black children he had fathered, Haddon, who owned a 150-acre farm, decreed the following: "I leave to my Negro children their bedding and clothes, and to my wench Rose $25. To my Negro boys Francis and Robert $20 each. My executors are to sell 10 sheep which my two oldest Negro boys have, and put the money at interest for them. Some slaveholders were far from generous toward their enslaved children. Consider the case of Benjamin Stamets, who lived in the Kings County town of Gravesend, now part of Brooklyn, New York. In May 1750, Stamets, being very sick, willed his estate to his white wife, Sarah, and their 8 children, with the following directive about his black family. My Negro woman, Kate, and my 2 Negro children are to be sold by my executors to pay debts. Other children were saved from bondage through purchase by a parent, friend, or other acquaintance. This was the case with young Mary and John Ashby of Williamsburg, Virginia. From his work as a carpenter and sometimes messenger, their father, the former indentured servant Matthew Ashby, son of the black man and a white indentured servant, came up with the money to buy his children and his wife Anne from the bricklayer Samuel Spur in 1769. Matthew Ashby paid $150 sterling for his family, and that was no small sum. At the time, a white non-slaveholding family of 4 in the South had, on average, an annual household income of about £50. And technically, Matthew Ashby's wife and children were his slaves until his petition to free them was granted. Wow. What was it like to be a free black child in colonial America? Most free black families were far from well-to-do. Mere survival was a struggle. The children had to work on the family farm, at Papa's blacksmith, carpentry, or carriage shop, or at Mama's laundry, sewing, or catering business. Many children were bound out by their parents as house servants, as field hands, and as apprentices to cartwrights, tanners, tailors, shoemakers, printers, and other tradespeople. The indenture might begin as early as age 7 and last until age 17 or longer. Often room and board was the payment. Fortunate was the child bound to a fairly decent person, but many were not so lucky. Sometimes there was little difference between being bound out and being in bondage. Not all free black children in colonial America lived impoverished lives, though. The most well-known example is Maryland's Benjamin Banneker. He grew up relatively unfettered, got his mind primed at a nearby one-room Quaker school, and he was a whiz kid in math, had time to ponder the bees, the seasons, the stars, and could visit with the woman who had taught him to read and write. His English grandmother, the once indentured servant, Molly Welsh, was his teacher. Molly had married a man once her slave, Banneker, son of a Senegalese chieftain whose name evolved into Banneker and became the family's surname. Molly and Banneker's daughter, Mary, married an African freed man named Robert, who decided to take Banneker as his last name. Together, Mary and Robert built a rich farm on which they raised 4 children. Their firstborn and only son was Benjamin, and he grew up to make the clock from the mere observation of a pocket watch, to assist with the mapping of Washington, D.C., to produce several prized almanacs, and in cogent correspondence to challenge Thomas Jefferson on his skewed racial views. Go ahead, Benjamin. The outcry of blacks and whites, many of them Quakers, against slavery had little effect. In the early 1770s, there were about 460,000 enslaved children, women, and men in the 13 colonies, whose total population was about 2.2 million. So that's about 25%. Okay. However, as restless colonists became determined to cast off British rule, a multitude of enslaved adults hoped that they and their children would soon be free. After all, Many patriots claimed to abhor slavery. They deemed it a sin and a shame, an undue burden. Several thousand blacks, freed, and enslaved, fought for the new nation, and there were some young folks among the black patriots. Most notable was Philadelphia's future entrepreneur, philanthropist, and abolitionist, the freeborn James Forten, who attended the school started by the Quaker. The Quaker Anthony Benezet, and did odd jobs at the sailmaking company he would one day own. In 1781, young James cast off as a powder boy aboard the Royal Lewis, leaving behind his sister and widowed mother. His service included 6 months' captivity aboard Great Britain's foulest prison ship, the Jersey. When he was once again free, James expected there would be broad liberty granted every black soul in the breakaway republic behind which he and other blacks had rallied. Instead, in this wonderful, terrible, conflicted, contradictory new nation, slavery would grow. So that was the end of Out of Africa, and tomorrow I will start reading Longing for Jubilee. But again, since this is Black History Month, and many folks may not have books in their house, but everybody probably has cable and on demand. So in my book, which I took to the publisher yesterday and should have in about 60 days, I'm recommending that you go on demand or Netflix, because Netflix has been pretty good the past couple of years in putting black stories, true stories of our history on screen. So I have a section in my book that says They Took Action. And the subtitle is Books and Movies About Black Heroes and Sheroes. There is a movie called White Man's Heaven. And I'm sorry. This is a book. I'm sorry. The book documents the lynching and total expulsion of African Americans from Pierce City, Missouri, and the Ozarks from 1894 to 1909. Now, maybe you can order that on Amazon or Kindle. I don't know. But Men of Honor is an excellent movie, and it chronicles the life of Carl Maxey Brashear, who was the first black master diver in the United States Navy. Of course, 42 is Jackie Robinson's life story. That is on demand. Everybody should read and see the autobiography of Malcolm X. Everybody should see Amistad, the story of Sinkay, the African who him and I think 54 other slaves overtook a slave ship, and not being able to speak the language of the New World, they left one guy alive, and that guy took them to Massachusetts, but they petitioned the court. I don't know how they did it, not being able to speak the language, but they won their case. They were given a ship and allowed to go back to Africa. That's what Amistad was about. Remember the Titans. That's very recent history. And that happened right across the bridge in Virginia. T.C. Williams. True story. A Raisin in the Sun. That's generally on every year. And I believe that I saw that they're going to put Roots back on TV. I can't look at Roots again. That just totally pisses me off. The Autobiography of Miss Jane Pittman. Do you think these revolutionaries had some guts? You ain't seen nothing until you seen them old black women in the South from the turn of the century through the 1940s and 50s. Sounder. That was the movie that Cicely Tyson got. Yeah, I think she got her first Academy Award nomination with that. And it was about a poverty-stricken family and a young boy's transition from childhood to adulthood. 4 little girls. Really painful story, but I think Spike Lee put that to screen. Something the Lord Made. And I think Mos Def starred as Vivian Theodore Thomas. And he was working to become a heart surgeon. In The Ghost of Mississippi, Whoopi Goldberg. Search up any of those movies. Those are true stories. They talk about our trek across the ocean from Africa to America. I'm talking about Amistad, through the civil rights movement and the death of Medgar Evers. But these are things that if you don't have a library, books that you can pass along to your children, you can certainly call up one of those movies on demand and just have a movie night and sit and talk about it. Because again, we were talking about it on the phone today. There's a school in Utah who, when I read it a couple of days ago, they were giving children the option of opting out. The white children an option of opting out of Black history. But I learned today on the Zoom call that they're just not going to teach it, period. And this is a school system in Utah. So it's up to us. So I will be back to you guys tomorrow. And as Roy Wood Jr. says, I do this for the culture. This is A21 from Black Rose's Garden. I'm out.